But today we have a special guest, a good friend of ours, missionary that works here in the States. He does some things abroad as well. We'll let him share about that. And I met Caleb several years ago, and I remembered him. There was something that I saw about him. The Lord had his hand on his life. And I was up in Minnesota. Caleb's come a long way to share today about what he's doing, the impact he's making, the lives that he's changing as he's working to liberate people out of human trafficking. He's on the front lines of evil things that happen in this world today. Some of it's happening right under our nose. And the church needs to be involved. The church needs to be involved, be the hands and feet. And as we talk about it, I know the kids are with us in the service, and we have sanitized some of this stuff. We want to be careful. But kids, I want you kids to listen to me for a second. The enemy, his job, what he's out to do is to steal, kill, and destroy. Y'all kiddos, listen to me for a second. The enemy is out there literally stealing people. He's out there, he literally wants to take people and do harm. And so Caleb has been leading, has co-founded a ministry where God steps in and rescues people out of bondage. Amen? There's literal bondage happening today in America. And I'm going to let Caleb, our good friend, share this morning. Caleb, would you come? Let's give him a welcome.
Thank you, Pastor Chad. Good morning, church. How are we doing? All right. Are we awake, alive, and excited? At least alive, hopefully. Check your neighbor. We're all alive. All right. Great to be with you today. I am all the way from Minnesota. There is no snow in Minnesota for a couple days. No, we're enjoying summer up there, and great to be down here in the great state of Texas with you to share about what God has called us to do, what God is doing through our ministry. It's really His ministry we get to be a part of. But excited to share about that. Before I get too preachy, because once I get started, it's hard to stop. Just a couple intro things. We have a little book at our table. It's a 30-day devotional about building a heart of unreasonable compassion. Who here knows we need more compassion in our world, right? So I only have a few. If you want one after service, we just ask for a donation to cover the printing is all we ask. And then if you go to the next slide, we have our newsletter on a QR code. If you want to sign up for that, it'll also be at our table. If you do not know how to use a QR code, I brought a clipboard, okay? We're still using those. And so you can sign up at our table as well. But as your pastor was talking about, human trafficking, most people when they think of human trafficking, if you're over the age of, let's say, 50, and you can decide if that's you or not, okay? If you're over that age, you have probably been hearing about this issue of human trafficking throughout your life. But it was always in Cambodia, Amsterdam, Thailand, right? That's what we've always talked about. It's some issue on the other side of the pond. It's somewhere far away. And it wasn't until about 10 years ago that we all of a sudden started to look next door. We started to look just a maybe mile down the road, and we started to realize, wait a minute, it's happening in our country. It's happening in our state. It's happening in your community. And until about 10 years ago, we never realized the gravity of this epidemic, of this situation. In fact, if you look at statistics, they will tell you that the U.S. is in the top 3 worst countries every single year. When I say it's a problem, when I say it's an epidemic, I'm not just using words to persuade, it's the reality of what we're facing today. And as we look at statistics and what it looks like, if you've seen a movie 2 or 3 years ago that came out about human trafficking, right? Many of us saw that movie. And if you haven't, I'm going to ruin it for you, okay? Because you had 3 years to watch it, okay? If not, you can leave the room. I'll give you 5 seconds. No. But the movie that came out, Sound of Freedom, many people watched it and have this idea that that is what human trafficking must look like, right? If you watch the movie, you know that it exists around this idea of abductions and kidnappings, right? These young kids were abducted. They were put on a cargo ship and brought across the world, and one of them ended up in a cartel in, I believe, Honduras, and the other one ends up being brought across the border, and somebody's paid off, right? If you've seen the movie, this all plays out. And it once again perpetuated this idea that has been perpetuated for years and years, that that is what human trafficking looks like. So if you don't see that in your community, it must not be happening. But after working in this field for 7 years, I want to tell you that is not what human trafficking looks like in the U.S. It's not abductions and kidnappings. In fact, less than 1% of trafficked victims will ever be abducted or kidnapped. But most of us in the room would have thought it's a majority. That's how it plays out in the media anyways. And in fact, 83% of trafficked individuals in our country are U.S. citizens. They're our neighbors. They're our grandkids. They're the kids that we teach in school or you taught years ago in Sunday school. These are our kids. And once again, I want to tell you, it's our problem. It's no longer over in Thailand, and it's no longer somebody being brought here. All of a sudden, we realize that it's, once again, our kids. It's our responsibility to do something. The question is, what will we do? Will we be a part of it, or will we continue to stick our head in the sand and say, I hope somebody does something about that? A couple more statistics to understand today is that the average age for a girl to first be trafficked in the U.S. is only 13 years of age. Now, if you remember math class, in order to get that average, there's a lot younger individuals in that number. With the youngest victim we ever worked with being 5 years old in this country. And boys are not immune to this issue. In fact, at a younger age of only 11 years old on average. Which is why I'm glad the kids are in the room today. Because there's a thought of if we don't talk about this issue, if we just wait until kids are just old enough till we feel like we can bring it up when they're 18, 19 years old, right? Sometimes we have this idea, like we can't talk about what's happening in the world. But the issue is if we wait until kids are 18 years old, they've already been facing it for 7 or 5 years, having never realized what's really happening to them. With the leading form of trafficking in our country being what's called familial trafficking. It's not a stranger. It's oftentimes somebody that knows that kid. One more statistic, and then I'll try to stop. I'm a stats guy, okay? But one more statistic is that $150 billion a year is made in the world of human trafficking. Do you understand how big of a number that is? Most of us do not. Anybody ever seen $1 million in a briefcase? If you have, I have a great ministry I'm going to tell you about, okay? But for those of us that have to check their bank app before they buy Chipotle or whatever, right? Or put guacamole on your Chipotle, right? For us normal people. To understand that big of a number, I want you to pick 3 of your favorite companies in our country and in our world today, or your least favorite, depending who you are. 3 of the biggest companies you can think of, right? Amazon, Nike, Google, Tesla, all these different companies. I'm going to pull Tesla out of that because I haven't looked at the statistics since this week, okay? But all the other companies, the big companies that make lots of money, if you combine 3 of those companies together, they will not profit $150 billion this year. That is how big of a number we are talking that is being made in this criminal industry that we are fighting. So the question is, what do you do about it? Right? It's one thing to know about an issue. It's one thing to have a burden or a passion. But when we jumped into this 7 years ago, I like to say we jumped in head first into a pool with no water, right? Anybody ever done that in life, right? You're like, I'm going to do this. And then you're like, oh, no, there was no water, okay? For us, it was we read the news articles, we saw the Facebook posts, we watched the movies that were out at the time. We thought that's what human trafficking looked like. And then we realized as we got into it, it looks a lot different than what we had been told. So I'm going to talk this morning about some of the ministries that we do, some of the outreaches of how we access these victims, how we find them, how we get them help, how we restore them through that process this morning. If you want to go to the next slide, this is one of the things that we do is we look for missing children. Now, if you remember, I said less than 1% will be kidnapped, right? So why do we look for missing kids? Because runaway kids become trafficked kids. It's not abductions. It's kids that are running away for whatever reason that are vulnerable to falling to this trap. That vulnerability that exists, that oftentimes it's not the church that's the first one to offer them a place to stay and a meal and everything they need. Unfortunately, it's usually somebody with bad intentions. It's estimated that in the first 72 hours, 2/3 of runaways will be approached by a trafficker. 72 hours. How do they get to them so quick? Well, there's a reality that they're already talking to our kids. If your kid has a cell phone, and now all the kids and youth are going to hate me. If your kid has a cell phone, who are they really talking to? Do they really know who they're talking to? Oftentimes, these runaway children have already been talking to a trafficker for months, never realizing that's who it is. So we go door to door handing out flyers in strategic neighborhoods. These aren't like random kids. These are cases that we get, that we have intel that we have built on these kids, knowing where they are probably in this area. And we hand out hundreds, if not thousands of flyers in a week to every house, every gas station, every hotel in that neighborhood. And it's estimated that 98% of missing kids that will be found are due to this outreach. We're not the only ones that do it, okay? I'm not going to say that. But if a kid goes missing, if they're going to be found, 98% of the time, somebody does this exact thing. Handing out flyers in a strategic neighborhood where they have been recently seen. And that is what we find as well. If we go to a city, if we look for a missing kid, we are likely to find them through this outreach. If you go to the next slide this morning, this is a young boy last year that we were looking for in Las Vegas. And as we were looking in this neighborhood, we had probably 50 volunteers canvassing, handing out flyers. We actually knocked on the door of the mom and the sisters. Now, we get lots of intel, but we don't always get all the intel, right? And so we happened to knock on their door, which obviously that makes it a strategic neighborhood, right? That's where he lives. That's where his friends are. That's where his school is. And as we began talking to the mom and the sister, they began sharing the story of what had happened. And during that probably 30-minute conversation, one of our other team members, a couple streets away, actually located this missing kid, sleeping on a couch of a friend's house for the last 7 days. But the unfortunate reality is there were strings attached, things that he experienced in order to sleep on that couch every night. I believe you can fill in the lines on that. For 8 days, that was his story. And as the detectives were called and all this stuff that happened, the mom looked at us during the conversation and she said, "Why do you care?" Looked at us. She said, "Why would you," this was in Vegas, "why would you come all the way to Minnesota, and we have team members in Texas and Colorado, and why would all these volunteers fly in from all around the country? Why would you do all that? Why do you care?" She said, "I didn't think anybody in this world would care about my kids." Single mom, didn't have people around her, didn't have a support system or a church that she was involved in. Why do you care? And in our ministry, we love what's called the simple gospel. I don't know if you like Bible studies about Revelations, and that's cool, it's an important part, but we don't use that on the street a whole lot, right? The simple gospel of telling her the parable of Jesus leaving the 99 for the one. Now, I know for you, that might seem like Sunday school, right? You learned that a long time ago. But sharing that with a mom that was not involved in a church, that Jesus left the 99 for us, right? To find the one someday, every one of us. And that is what compels us. That is what God uses to compel us to go after these ones, one at a time. Her family is now involved in an amazing church that we're connected with in Vegas, and their lives have changed. Why? Because somebody went. When we look at missions, when we think missions, a lot of times we think, if you grew up in church, it's always somewhere else, right? Africa, China, Thailand, whatever it might be, and those are important. But when you really boil down missions, missions is reaching people where they are, not waiting for them to come here. Right? We go to church every Sunday, we do all that stuff, and that is important, and we invite people to church, but there is a large group of people in our country and in our world today that will not show up to church unless somebody goes and gets them first. Right? Same thing in our country. The victims that we are reaching, they oftentimes don't even know what day it is. How are they going to show up at a church on Sunday at 10 in the morning unless missionaries go into the darkest places of our country and pull them out and get them connected? If you want to go to the next slide, another ministry that we do is, I'm going to jump to that in a second, but we also do school assemblies around the country. We won't have slides up for this because the words that are on those slides are a little bit much for the ages that are in the room. But as we travel the country doing school assemblies, talking about bullying, suicide, addiction, and human trafficking. Why? Because those first three things fuel into vulnerability. Bullying, which obviously causes oftentimes suicide, and addiction, which oftentimes causes vulnerability to being trafficked. And as we've spoken to almost 500,000 students at this point around the country, talking about these issues, educating about these issues, every single school we go to, and I'm not making that up, every single school we've been to, at least one kid is rescued out of human trafficking. In small towns, in big cities, in rich communities, in poor communities. Every single school we go to, somebody comes forward and they say, that story you shared, the red flags that were on the screen about human trafficking, the scenarios that you said, that's my story, they tell us. I never realized before today, they'll say, that this has been happening to me for the last 6 years of my life, never knowing this wasn't normal. We were in Joplin, Missouri, had a 17-year-old student come down to the gym floor at the end, and he began sharing his story. Same thing that I just said. I never realized it. My mom would bring me to truck stops. Usually I would sit in the car while things were happening, but eventually things switched, and she said, Stephen, I need you to come with me. He said, I was 10 years old the first time this ever happened. And it would repeat itself weekend after weekend, night after night. And for him, because he grew up around it, he saw his mom doing these things. Not only that, but when your mom tells you to do something, right? As a kid, hopefully you do it, right? But that also works in reverse. When his mom would tell him to do things, he just thought it was normal. So for 7.5 years of his life, he existed and lived and thought every other kid experienced this until somebody with a microphone was standing on his gym floor saying, this is not normal. If this is happening to you, we make a very strong promise. And my wife, by the way, I'm married, I forgot to say that. She's a mental health therapist, and she tells us it's a very dangerous promise you make. But the promise we make at every school assembly is if you tell us your story, we promise to get you help. It's dangerous because you're dealing with CPS, you're dealing with social workers, you're dealing with school counselors, but the reality is we will not leave that school until that kid receives help. And we will do whatever we have to do in order to make that happen. At the end of that school assembly, his name was Stephen. He went to a rescue home in the Joplin, Missouri area. This was probably 5 years ago now. He has since graduated out of that rescue home. He spent about 2 years there. and he's going to college right now, and his life has completely changed. But about 6 months after he was, if you want to call it, rescued off that gym floor, he called us and he said, we go to church every Sunday. They load up the van with all the kids at this rescue home, and they go to a church. He said, I gave my heart to Jesus last week. In a couple weeks, I'm getting baptized. Right? These are the kids of our communities, that if nobody goes for them, they just exist in a world that nobody realizes. One more quick stories on school assemblies, maybe two. I could be up here for 7 hours, right? Story after story. The way that we get most of these stories, the way that students open up is, one, we're super vulnerable, right? We have a survivor of trafficking that shares her story. We have a survivor of a suicide attempt that shares his story. We share stories that we have experienced through friends and all this stuff. And at the end of the assembly, we say, we've told you our story. We want to hear yours. Many kids, it's the first time in their life somebody that was vulnerable with them and wants to hear what they have to say. And at the end of the assembly, we roll out this big white piece of paper. It's like, art paper on a big roll, all the way across the gym floor. And we hand every student, junior high or high school in the gym, a black Sharpie. Every janitor in the school starts twitching, okay? It happens. Hand them Sharpies and say, we want to hear your story. Come down and write your story. I remember when I first got involved 7 years ago, I was just at an assembly. I obviously didn't get the microphone on the first week, just watching this. And I remember the first time I'm watching this altar call happen. Okay, it's an altar call. We just can't say that in a school. We put, worship music on in the background, no words, the whole thing. I remember watching this, and I'm like, there's no chance these kids are coming down. I was a youth pastor before I did this, okay? I know how junior hires are. They just don't do what you tell them. And so I'm like, there's no way this is going to happen. And as soon as the moment happened, as soon as the speaker, Andrew, said, on the count of 3, I want you to run down here and write your story. We're waiting to hear it. And he counts to 3, and the music cranks up. Every single student in that stadium ran to the gym floor. Why? Because they're desperately waiting for somebody to get them help, to listen to them, to care about what they're going through. Many kids in our state, in our country today, don't have that in their life. And as they come down and they write their story, we were in Colorado 2 years ago, and a 14-year-old girl shared her story about what she had faced. Her parents had a drug addiction, which made her vulnerable to being trafficked. And through this story that she wrote out, I have a picture of it if you want to see it later. She writes out all the details of what happened. And she ends the paragraph with, I can't tell the rest. If you read this story after service, if you want to, I can't imagine writing this story out for myself. The details, the graphic details of what she encountered, and ending the story with, I can't tell the rest. As we read this story, as she was writing it down before we connected with her, our hearts broke to know that there was more to this story. And as we talked to her in the hallway afterwards and began hearing more of her story, she said, the rest of the story is, the first time it ever happened, my parents made me. I was 5 years old. She said, for the last 9 years, this has been my life. She said, I only came forward to share my story today for one reason. She said, my younger sister turns 5 this week. And I never want what happened to me to happen to her. Would you please get us help? And we got the whole family help. They don't live in that situation anymore. They are getting counseling and recovery through that program. That is what it's about, right? I wish I could stand up here and say that we rescued 10,000 people last year, but that's not the reality. It's one at a time. It's one girl in Colorado. It's one boy in Joplin. It's a senior in high school in Georgia, in Atlanta, that at the end of the assembly, she said, I was going to take my life tonight, but this assembly saved my life. Right? It's that one person at a time. That is what the ministry is about. And 3 years ago, the co-founder and myself, we're both co-founders, Andrew, we're talking about what is God calling us to do next, right? We're always going to work in Vegas. We go there about 8 weeks a year, reach out to victims through missions trips. People from all over the country come and serve with us. We're always going to do school assemblies. We're always going to do all this stuff, but what is God calling us to do next? And separately, before that conversation happened, we had both had Puerto Rico laid on our hearts. For whatever reason, in our own separate prayer times, he lives in Colorado, I live in Minnesota, right? We're not together all the time. We both felt Puerto Rico laid on our hearts that God was calling us to go. And as we flew down there to Puerto Rico for it was probably 48 hours, 72 hours that we were down there originally. We went to the superintendent, the leader of a denomination's church down there, and we connected with him after service, and we told him who we are, what we do, and he said, you're not going to believe this, but I have been praying for you to come for the last 2 years. He said, we are facing this reality in our churches. We have young girls and teenagers that are being brought into this world of trafficking. We need help. And I've been praying for you guys to come for 2 years. Isn't it cool when God just does that, right? We had never met this guy before, but he had been praying. And so as we worked in Puerto Rico, we identified a need that existed. It wasn't necessarily to go there and plant our flag in the middle of the island and say, we're going to tell you all how to do it, right? That doesn't work very well. But it was a reality of there were good ministries that already existed in Puerto Rico that were reaching the vulnerable, that were reaching out to the trafficked. All they needed was help getting to the next level. And with that, we adopted a couple different projects, which I'll get to in a second. But the first thing we did 2 years ago, if you go to the next slide, is we partnered with a church that goes out on the streets where these girls are being sold on the streets in America. Right, Puerto Rico's in America. It looked like another country, like what we would imagine another country. But going out on the street, giving them a gift with an invite to a gala on Friday night at a church. They have a rooftop, which is super cool at this church. And they had already been doing this, but we helped them with catering and different stuff for their event. And they're like, we're going to do it on a Friday night. We're going to invite all these victims to our church on a Friday night. And we're like, that's probably not the best night to do it because Friday night is a busy night in that world. But we're like, all right, we're in. We're going to do this. And so out on the streets, multiple nights beforehand, giving out gifts, handing out invites, inviting them to come to this event at a church, okay? And we were skeptical of how it would go, right? We had never done something quite like this. And if you go to the next slide, on Friday night, over 20 victims showed up at a church. There was music, there was food, there was like a comedian, I think. I don't speak Spanish that well, but I was told he was a comedian. And at the end of the night, there was a clear gospel presentation. Now, was it fire and brimstone? No. But was it all, you can just go on with your life and live the way you are? No. It was a clear gospel presentation about what God has done for you and what he is calling you to be. And at the end of this night, at least 5 of them raised their hands for salvation that night. Once again, why? Because somebody was willing to go into the dark alleys of Puerto Rico and say, there is so much more for you. God has called you to greatness. All 5 of them are connected at that church today, changing their lives through that process. We adopted a Christian school in Puerto Rico. There was a hurricane about 9 years ago that hit Puerto Rico very hard. And after the hurricane, 65% of the schools never reopened on the island. Can you imagine, like the state of Texas, like all of a sudden 65% of the schools are gone and never reopened? So what happened was many of the kids just were not going to school. It wasn't close enough for them to get to. Their parents weren't driving them. If you want to go to the next slide, this is the school. And so a pastor started this in kind of the mountain area of Puerto Rico, but they had a problem that they lose power at least once a week, which is fine because they have solar power and they have outside, right? They can do school outside if they need to. But what also happens is they lost water at least once a week on a different day. It wasn't always the same day. Well, you can't really flush the toilet for 60 kids without water. And so we partnered with them, if you want to go to the next slide, and we were able to put in a water retention system for them. It's rainwater. They get lots of rain in Puerto Rico. And we were there a couple months ago. And we were supposed to power wash their building to paint it, and the water wasn't working. But these were. And all 60 kids were in school learning about God, learning about math, all that different stuff, on a day when normally school would have been canceled because of a simple project. Another project that we did, if you want to go to the next slide, is we just grand opening in February was the Detox Center at Women's Teen Challenge. You guys know Teen Challenge? We love Teen Challenge, right? It's an incredible program around the world and in the U.S. They didn't have a detox center, so their clients, if you will, they were having to send to a hospital to go through the medical detox program. And about 90% of those girls, after they went through the medical detox program at the hospital, would walk out the door and fall right back into the life that they were in. They were not having a very good success rate. And as we talked to the director about 3 years ago, we said, how many of your clients have been trafficked? Because we want to stay in our lane, right? That is our lane, is trafficking. She said, I've been here for 10 years, and I've yet to have a single woman in this program that has not faced that reality. Every single one. In Puerto Rico, it's well known if you are a young girl with a drug addiction, this is the life you're going to have. And so we just opened this. Right now, there are 6 young girls in that detox center, and it is about 20 feet away from the main building of Teen Challenge. So it's a lot easier transition for them to walk right over. And so we told God, hey, we're going to be done with projects for this year. Anybody ever tell God something? I wouldn't recommend it. He does what you just did. He laughs at us, I feel like. And this leader of a denomination approached us in January and said, hey, I was given a house, but it has to become a rescue home for human trafficking. And he's like, you are the only organization I know of that will actually get it done, right? Anybody ever do too good at their job and then they get more work, right? That's what happened with this. And so, and then he looked at us and said, so you're going to get it done, right? We're like, yes, Pastor Yvonne, we will do this. So if you want to go to the next slide, this is the house that we have been given to turn into a rescue home for trafficked victims. It is the first of its kind. There is currently no rescue home like this on the island. So when we pull girls off the streets, we don't have a good place to send them at this moment. Usually it's Teen Challenge, which is good, but it's not quite the focus that they need, right? All the trauma that they have been through. And so this house was given to us. What's amazing is they build everything out of concrete in Puerto Rico. So for us mainlanders, I looked at that house, I drove there, I actually took that picture, and I'm like, that is a major project. But what we were told by the locals is they're like, that is all concrete. So the incredible thing is you scrape some paint, you power wash, you replace some windows, and it turns out, which is what happened with the detox center too. So we've been given this house. Our goal is to have it open by the end of next year. And we're estimating about $50,000 needs to be raised for this project. We've raised about $25,000 already in the last couple months, and so we would invite you with the offering later today, if this would be on your heart, to see victims restored in Puerto Rico. If you want to be a part of that, that is what you can be a part of. But the cool thing about this project, I want to tell you, is it's not even about the first 6 women that are going to be in there. Like the day that opens, there's going to be 6 beds in this house as well, ready for them. It's not even about the first 6 that we go out on the streets of Puerto Rico and say, hey, we have a brand new, ready-to-go house, ready for you. It's not even, honestly, for me, it's not even about them. It is. But what it's really about in my mind is the generations of families that will be changed because of this house. Because eventually those first 6 victims might get married, and they might have kids, and those kids might have grandkids, right? Whatever God has for their plan, what would happen if we changed 6 families in 1 year? In 20 years from now, 50 years from now, we see their kids and their grandkids living a totally different life. Why? Because we fixed up a house and offered a bed and had mentors and counselors and people that were ready to change their life because somebody cared enough to say, we're not only going to pull you off the streets, but we're going to be part of your life for the next 2 years if you want it, right? We're going to change their kids' lives, their grandkids. That's what ministry is about. Yes, we want to change the one life, right? We want to change the person in front of us life, but in our mind, we always look down the road of what God could do. And the last ministry thing I'm going to cover, and then my message really quickly. There's no football game today, so we're good, right? Is we do a darknet outreach. I'm going to cover very quickly. I'm not going to go into detail because of safety and security. So if you want to know more about how we actually do this, you can talk to me after service when we're not live streaming. But we contact victims all across the country. We will be in the middle of the U.S. in 2 weeks doing this. And we offer them prayer, we offer them help, we offer them a way out of the life if they want it. And I want to show you a couple of the texts that we got back. This is one from last year. This one is in Minnesota. It says, "Thank you so much. This made me very sad, but I'm fine, thank you. These are probably the prayers of my parents who are pastors of a church. I know they have me in their prayers. I grew up in church. Even if you don't believe it, I was even baptized. I know God has great purposes for me, but everything comes in his own time. Thank you so much. I would appreciate it if you could pray for me." This one's personal. I have kids. I have 2 young boys. I'm a pastor. I know lots of pastors. I'm in lots of churches. When I said at the beginning that these are our kids, this is what I mean. She probably had a Sunday school teacher that taught her every Sunday. She had a youth pastor that poured into her life and cared about her through that journey of being a teenager. She had parents that stood on stage and preached and were there for her, but whatever happened in her life, that she fell victim to this reality. There are parents in Minnesota right now praying for her in this moment. At the end of the conversation or during the conversations, we give them a phone number to call to get out of their situation. And praise God, she was one of them that called that night. Her prayers of her parents. Quick challenge for you as a parent. Keep praying for your kids. Whether they are living for God in ministry, pray for them. Or whether they have walked astray, never quit praying. Because God will answer. Here's another quick text that we received. It says, "Yes, I'm struggling with paying my rent and addiction, but I'm wanting to get out of this lifestyle. So if you could pray for that, I would appreciate it greatly. I'm a single mother, and I'm just trying to make ends meet. And I've been in this lifestyle for 17 years. I'm tired of it." The average lifespan for a victim is only 7 years. From the first day they are trafficked, if they are not rescued in 7 years, they will likely not make it. Why? The physical trauma, the drug addiction, everything else that goes into it, many of them will never see this day of 17 years. So the question is, what does God call us to do? Right? Because it's one thing to hear a terrible thing, to hear terrible stories, heartbreaking stories, but what does the scripture say that we are called to do about it? Because that's the answer at the end of the day, right? If you don't turn to the Bible for the answer, you're probably turning to the wrong spot. But what does God call us to do? I want to look again at a simple gospel story. Luke 10, verse 25 through 37 this morning. It's the story of the Good Samaritan. I like going back to the simple gospel, the parables, the New Testament. I like to go there often. And I like to read the stories that I learned 25 years ago. but reading them with a different lens. Not just assuming, oh, I've heard this story, I know it, but taking my time reading what God would speak to me in this moment through this story. So that's what we're going to do today. Starts off with, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Not always a good thing to do, right? Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law, he replied. How do you read it? He answered. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself. Do you ever try to do that? You ever try to justify yourself with Jesus? Right? I know I'm not like the perfect Christian, but I'm not like that other guy at church, right? Right? We've all been there. So we asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Like, it's only the people I like, right? It's not the person that votes differently than me. It's not the person that acts differently than me, right? It's only the people I like, right, Jesus? Continues on, it says, in reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him, but also passed by on the other side, right? Is that how the story goes? Not quite. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey or Tesla, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, which is about 2 days' salary, and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. I think many times we even try to justify ourselves this way. As we read that story, most of us in the room would say, I'm like the Good Samaritan, right? We always like to pick the hero. We're like, yeah, I'm like him. But I wonder if sometimes in our life, in our busyness, in our focusing on other things, how often do we see something and cross by on the other side? Do we really slow down enough to notice people and look in their eyes and really see what's happening? I have 3 points this morning because in pastor school I was told every sermon has 3 points. So 3 points this morning. Number 1 is pity doesn't save lives. I made a joke as I was reading that he didn't just have pity and go home. He knelt down. He bandaged. He put the bloody guy on his donkey. Most of us wouldn't put a bloody guy in our car, right? But this guy did, right? He paid for it. He did all this stuff. How many of you watch TV too late at night? Anybody? And that God-forsaken commercial comes on. You guys know what I'm talking about? In the arms of the angels. You've all seen it, right? And there's always these like puppies, and somehow they get the dog to cry. I don't know how they do that, okay? But these puppies that are so sad, and then there's cats, but nobody cares about the cats. The dogs, okay? We have 2 dogs. My wife has 2 cats. That's how our marriage works, okay? But this terribly sad commercial, and I'm going to tell you, I feel bad for those animals, right? We all should, okay, if you care about humanity and animals, right? I feel bad for those animals, right? All dirty, and it's always raining. But you know how many times I've sent that organization money? 0. Right? Maybe you're better than me. Maybe you have. I don't know. But I have pity for those animals. But have I saved any of their lives? No. What I'm getting at is simply having pity for a situation doesn't save life. Why? Because pity doesn't require action. We have pity for a lot of things in our world, and I would even say we have pity for too many things. I don't believe that God created us to know about every heartbreaking thing in our world at the very moment it's happening, which is a whole nother sermon. But we get empathy fatigue, right? Because we know everything that's happening, how can we truly have empathy, or even better than empathy is compassion? Because compassion means there's action. You're doing something for that, right? But simply having pity will never save a life. It's compassion that does. Point number 2 is living on mission takes time and resources. Honestly, I think for some people, many of us, it's easier to give resources than time. But God calls for both. In America, at least in Minnesota, maybe you guys are better in Texas, but we almost wear a badge of honor when people say, hey, how have you been doing? You know what everyone's favorite answer is, at least up in Minnesota? Busy. Do you guys do that down here? Everyone's always, man, I'm so busy. And it almost feels like a badge of honor, like we feel important. I'm so busy. So many people need me. I have all this stuff going on, right? But I want to challenge you this morning. We should be looking to be the least busy people. Now, that doesn't mean sit on your butt and do nothing. But it means, is there any margin in your schedule to do the ministry that God puts right in front of your feet? Or is there no margin at all that you just keep on driving on the road and never take the moment to do the ministry? If you're type A like me, I have a calendar for the next 2 years. I have a spreadsheet, and then God likes to change my spreadsheets, right? That's the way it goes. But I have everything. I know what I'm doing tomorrow and next week and the following week. If you're like me, I would challenge you. Pray a dangerous prayer. I'd challenge everybody to pray a dangerous prayer today and every day. God, mess up my schedule this week. Some of you are going to start twitching if you say that prayer, right? You're control freaks. But honestly, give God the authority. He already has it, but give it to him, that you give him full control of your schedule. Sometimes we're so busy that the person at our office that you see is hurting so bad. You can see it in their eyes. But you have to get home and you got to make dinner and you got to take care of the kids, which I get. But are we willing to take those 5 minutes and minister to somebody? At the gas station, do you really look into the person's eyes and really ask them how they're doing? Because God puts ministry right in front of us every single day. And oftentimes we trip over it and think it was a distraction. But we need to look at what God gives to us each day. It takes time and resources. He didn't just do the drive-by like they do in movies, like kick the guy out of the car at the ER and keep on going, right? He said, here's 2 denarii, here's 2 days' salary. I will come back and settle up the bill. Can you imagine doing that today? Right? Hospital bills are a little different than they were back then, but are you willing to do that in your life? To look into somebody's eyes and say, what do you need right now? Do you need me to listen? Do you need me to talk? Do you want advice? For the dudes in the room, most often they don't want advice, okay? Especially in the ladies, right? Just listen to me. And point number 3 is this: go and do likewise. I love it when Scripture ends with that. Go and do likewise, because I don't read it as just a command to that guy that was trying to justify himself. I read it as a command for me too. Go and do likewise. Would you look for those people that are half dead on the side of your roads of life, metaphorically, hopefully not literally around here that often? And would you go and do likewise? Would you sit with that widow or widower and listen to their stories? Would you go to that single mom in your community that could just use somebody's help, or single dad, and say, what do you need? Help them, and oftentimes it's just listening to them. So with that, I'm going to close in prayer. And I want to encourage you to say a prayer with me if you want to live dangerously. To say a prayer, as I mentioned earlier, that you would give God full control of your week this week. And I would love for you to have a smile on your face on Tuesday when you see God mess up your schedule. not to be mad, but to recognize the ministry moment. So as I pray, would you just agree with me in that? Lord, we come before you today, Lord, understanding the heartbreaking realities of what is happening in this fallen world. But God, we also recognize our responsibility. We recognize the things that you are putting right in front of our face. We recognize that you want to see us change not only the world, but our city, our neighborhood, the business we work at. Lord, would people in this room today, would they take the challenge? Lord, would you mess up my schedule? Lord, would you allow me to put your glasses on, Lord, the heavenly glasses, and start to see the people that you've been putting in my life for weeks or months or even years, Lord, that we've never slowed down enough to notice, that you have put them in front of us because we are called to reach them. We are called to pray with them. We're called to sit with them as they hurt and sit with them as they cry and even sit with them as they celebrate, Lord. So would you allow us to recognize when you're calling us to change our schedule, when you're calling us to stop, when you're calling us to just be present in that moment with that person this week. And would you speak to our heart when that moment is happening? Would we recognize the miracle of that moment? And would you give us words to reach people right where they are, Lord? In your name, amen.
What a challenging word this morning. The ministry that Caleb is doing is literally going into darkness, some of the darkest places where people are hurting, and he needs our support, needs our prayers.